So welcome everyone to our first kickoff webinar for the Launch Legumes Fall Grant season. We are really excited to have you, even more excited to see the projects that you're going to be putting in as time goes on. But we shouldn't jump the gun too much there. I realized I didn't say this before. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll be kind of monitoring that and saving some time at the end to go through your Q&A. If there are any unanswered questions at the end, we try to compile those and send out some information and add them to our frequently asked questions page. So fear not, we will get to as many of them as we can. As we get started here, I just want to remind you all, just stay muted for the duration of the presentation today. We will be recording this. We will be sharing it out with all the other grantees who weren't able to make it today and likely posting it on our website so that you can go back and review it as well. So if you don't want your sneezes to be captured forever, keep your microphones muted for today. A couple of things that we just want to clarify for you, because this is a really big project, a really big program, and it can't be done just by one person or one organization. So throughout the course of the grant period, you will see that you're getting communication from a couple of different organizations, and we wanted to try and clarify that for you. The Launch Legumes program is a program of the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. And they have contracted with Blue Thumb Planting for Clean Water to help manage this individual support program of the grant. And Blue Thumb is actually kind of the education and statewide outreach arm of a nonprofit here in South Minneapolis called Metro Blooms. So if you see that we all work for all of these organizations in various capacities, and you see these logos on some of the material, just know we're all working together on the same program here. And we just want to try and clear that up for you. I will go ahead and introduce myself here first, and then we'll kind of get around from all the other presenters today. My name is Alexandra Zerzan. I am currently serving as the Minnesota Green Corps member here at Metro Blooms. I am at the tail end of my service period, but will be staying on through this grant program to help mainly with the coaching side of things. And I will go ahead and pass it off to Megan.
Hello, my name is Megan. I am Metro Bloom's Communications and Program Specialist, and I will be in touch with all of you by email. I'll be manning the L2L helpline and helping with your reimbursements. So I'll be the person behind a lot of that communication. And I'll pass it on now to John.
Hi, everyone. I'm John. I'm without a camera today, but I'm here to put important links that are mentioned through the presentation in the chat, and then to compile, maybe answer a couple of your questions that you put in the chat, and we'll cover at the end. And then I'll pass it to Dan Shaw.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Shaw with the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. I'm a senior ecologist and coordinator of the Launch the Legumes program. And I'll turn it over to Elena.
I don't believe Elena is here in this meeting today, so I'll jump in. My name is Jacqueline. I am the Blue Thumb Marketing and Project Manager, and I do the sending of the signs that you all receive.
Okay, well, I'll start off with some background about the Launch the Legumes program. And this was a program that started in 2019 with a focus on protecting at-risk pollinator species. The initial funding source for this program was from the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund through the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. And right from the beginning, this program was really focused on residential landscapes, knowing that residences across a state could really have an impact for benefiting the rusty patch bumblebee, Minnesota state bee, and many other pollinators. With this program, we have a focus on native plants, and there's a few reasons for that. Many of the insects that we're really focused on benefiting through this program, like the rusty patch bumblebee, monarch butterfly, many other species, have adapted with native plants and really rely on native plants as a food source. And native plants provide many other benefits. Many of our deep-rooted prairie plants help sequester carbon, increase infiltration. There's just a lot of benefits of native plants within our landscapes. Next slide. And with our focus on native plants, we're looking for straight native plants that aren't cultivars or hybrids. And we're starting with this information because it is a part where people get confused along the way. But I think one other key thing to point out here is that if you do have questions, that's where the coaches come in. The Blue Thumb team can answer questions on this. And we really rely on native plant nurseries too, as a go-to source for information about plants for this program. And so with cultivars and hybrids, there's a few things to pay attention to. Cultivars are usually having quotes around their name. Hybrids have an X in their name. And check the plant tag because that'll have that information. The hybrids and cultivars tend to have whimsical names. So that's true for many of them. And really shopping at native plant nurseries is really helpful. Typically, they won't have cultivars or hybrids of plants, and they can help you find the correct plants. So there's a few examples here on this slide. There's a Gaillardia spin-top orange halo. So that would be a cultivar. Spin-top orange halo blanket flower. That's a cultivar. It doesn't have the single quotes, but has the whimsical name. And then there's Gaillardia X grandiflora, which is a hybrid because it has the X in the name. Next slide. We have native and non-native versions of some plants in the state that are in the same genus. An example are different echinaceas or coneflowers. Narrow leaf purple coneflower is native where eastern purple coneflower isn't. So that's an example where a native plant nursery could help you with that. Columbine, Aquilegia canadensis is native, but there is also cultivar versions of it, like blue swan and white is a cultivar of an Aquilegia, or Aquilegia is the genus name. And then that's true with some woody plants as well, like ninebark. Physocarpus opulifolius is the native species, and there's different cultivars of ninebark. So with the way the program is set up, we're looking for those straight native species that aren't a cultivar or a hybrid. We can answer questions about that later when we get to the end of the presentation if you have any questions. From the beginning of this program, back in 2019 when it started, we had 3 components set up for the program. We had a public education and outreach campaign, really intended to reach as much of the public as we could for this program to raise awareness about pollinator losses and the need for conservation for pollinators. I mentioned the rusty patch bumblebee. Its populations have decreased about 80% over the last 20 years. We're really trying to raise awareness about the losses that have been happening for these pollinators. There's also been this individual support part of the program. And this is the part that you're participating in as a group of 1,200 awardees for this fall for the $350 grants and coaching and other assistance. That's part of this program. And then the final component of this program is called demonstration neighborhoods. And these are larger projects that local organizations coordinate with residents. And they're focused on building corridors through neighborhood areas or larger landscapes to support pollinators. So those are bigger projects that are run by local organizations. And again, you're participating in the individual support component of the program. This slide shows our priority area map. The dark green color are priority areas for the rusty patch bumblebee, the medium green are important corridors through the state. And really we're funding projects across the whole state in all these areas now. So you may be in one of these priority areas, but you may be in one of the lower priority areas as well. And we are really focused on getting a statewide distribution with this program now. I mentioned the $350 cost share reimbursements for the fall cohort. There's a few requirements for the funding. One is maintaining the projects for at least 3 years. Using locally adapted, local origin native plants, so that gets back to the native plants for the program. Protecting projects from pesticides, trying to minimize any impacts from pesticides around the plantings or on the plantings. And then submitting before and after images for projects, submitting receipts and requesting reimbursements for the program. There is a 25% match requirement for the program, but that can be your labor as well, and we'll get into more detail about that.
All right, so now I'm going to walk through some basic steps to doing a successful Lawns to Legumes project. So at this point, all of you have confirmed your participation in the program. Thank you for doing that. And next, it's time to start planning your project. Next slide. So there are 4 main project types that are associated with Lawns to Legumes that we want you to do with that $350 that you can get reimbursed. So if you'd like, you can do a combination of these different types, but I'm going to do an overview of each type in these next few slides. So next slide. The first is the native pocket planting. These are smaller plantings and they can come in a variety of shapes, settings. They can be a rain garden, they can be a boulevard planting, so that strip between your sidewalk and the street. They can be a shoreline buffer next to a lake or a river or stream, or they can just be a small 10 by 10 section in your yard. And one of the things that we really try to emphasize is to start small, especially if you're newer to native plants or even just gardening in general. You don't need to bite off more than you can chew. Even starting with just a small little section of your garden is a great start. And even those small bits of habitat for pollinators make a big difference for them, especially as more and more of us are putting pollinator gardens in our yards and slowly creating more connected habitat. Next slide, please. So the pocket plantings are probably our most popular project type. Our second most popular is the pollinator beneficial trees and shrubs. So trees and shrubs are great. They can add another dimension to your yard and garden. They can provide lots of benefits, including early season forage for pollinators. So if you've ever looked up at a maple tree, for example, in those early spring months, you'll see a bunch of bees getting active up there. And these sources of nectar are really important for queen bumblebees and other bees that are just coming out of hibernation and needing to get their energy going to start a new generation. And these plants are also good for pollinators because many are host plants and homes for a lot of moths and butterflies. So trees and shrubs are great for that. They can also, of course, provide edible fruit for both wildlife and humans. They can provide cooling through shade, autumn color, winter structure. So they're another great choice. And next slide. So another project type we have is called the pollinator lawn. And this is a project type where we do allow a couple of non-native species, which we'll get into later, but this is really a good project for you if you have a section of your yard that maybe you do get some more traffic on it. Maybe you have kids or you have pets that are running on your yard a lot and you want to have some space to still recreate. You don't want taller plants, but you still want to benefit pollinators. So In that case, a pollinator lawn is a really great choice. One of the main components of pollinator lawns are fine fescues. So they're a grass-like plant that is a lot more deep-rooted than our typical turf grass. Because of that, it requires very little watering once established. So once you get it in there, it's less work to take care of. You have to do very little mowing as well with these pollinator lawns. And you can see here just in this picture, pollinator lawns usually have a mix of different types of species. We have self-heal, which is a native species in Minnesota. We do have some native fescues in Minnesota, but some of them are non-native, so that's where our exceptions come in. You can get bee lawn mixes, which we'll talk about more in our resources section. Next slide. So finally, we have our pollinator meadow. So a pollinator meadow is essentially a larger version of a pocket planting. Maybe you want to take a whole bigger chunk of your yard and make it into essentially a short grass prairie, which is what this practice is kind of duplicating. But again, it's best to start small. So maybe you want to just take out a section and then expand into other areas year by year. And with the pollinator meadow, you want to aim for a mix of grasses and flowers. Those native grasses can provide just as many benefits as our flowers to our pollinators. Next slide. So we've talked about the 4 main project types, and let's chat a little bit about the design of your project. So you'll find more about this in our online resources, but the main message we want to share here is that you want to make your planting look as intentional as possible, right? So that your neighbors in your neighborhood can see that this is something you're doing on purpose, that you're trying to provide habitat for bees, and that you're encouraging others to do it. So some of the ways that you can do that are incorporating elements like stones and edging materials and borders to help frame your garden. Mulch and edging are 2 eligible project expenses. Some people also like to add like sculptures or water sources, or just other elements to create what we call those cues to care, so that people know that what you're doing is intentional. It just happens to be something with native plants and something that's helping out pollinators. Next slide. So a big part of planning your project is considering which native plant species you'll be incorporating into your project. So some of the important things you want to consider when choosing plants is selecting species that will thrive in the specific environmental conditions in your yard. So that'll involve kind of observing your yard in several ways. First of all, how much sunlight is there? Is it mostly sunny, or do you have a lot of larger trees where it's shady? Then you might want to go for a shade garden. Another thing you'll want to consider is the soil. If the soil is drier, if it's more moist at your site, as well as soil type too, whether it's more clay soil or sandy soil. All of these things will help you determine which plants you'll want to pick for your garden. And again, we'll go over our resources later in this presentation, but we have lots of plant lists that can help you with that plant selection process. And then the last bullet point here is really important, which Dan mentioned earlier, but we want you to have flowers that are blooming throughout the growing season. So species that bloom in spring, summer, and fall. That's pretty easy to do with summer blooming species, but you'll want to make sure that you have some of those more early blooming spring flowers, so that there's something there for those emerging bees when there's still not a lot of food around. And then the same thing for the fall, making sure you're providing some asters, goldenrod, or other species that can help provide food for pollinators before their long winter ahead. Next slide. So when it comes to thinking about garden layout, I try to go for a mixture of flowers, grasses, and shrubs if you can. And part of this is because many of our native flowers can get kind of like tall and leggy and they'll want to flop over. So adding in some grasses and shrubs helps provide a sense of structure. Sedges are also great for that. They're more low growing, so that can be good for a smaller garden. Another thing that can really help, especially if you're a new gardener, is to keep different species grouped together. So planting in chunks of 2 plants or 5 plants per spot. And that also makes it easier for pollinators that are looking for those flowers that they want and when they're moving from flower to flower. And then putting shorter plants in front. Some native plants can get very tall. So just thinking about where to place different plants so they can look their best. And I think at this point, I'll be passing it over to Alexandra.
Yes, thank you, Megan. So at this point, you kind of have an idea of what you want to install, which is fantastic. The next step is to actually get outside and do it, which can be the most daunting step, I know, for a lot of people. So we're just going to kind of do a quick overview on some of the steps, but I want you to know that our upcoming presentations and webinars through the rest of August are going to go really in depth on the installation of specific types of projects. So if you have a lot of questions at the end of this, that's okay. I promise we'll have some more time to talk about this in those webinars as well. So the first step to any project, and I would say probably one of the most important, is preparing your site. The really important thing about site preparation is that it is one of the main kind of keys as to whether or not your project is going to succeed in the future. And a lot of that has to do with, one, understanding your site, as Megan was talking about through the design process, but and two, making sure that you have dealt with any problems such as weeds and weed pressure that might be coming into your garden and could take over some of those smaller establishing plants. So we'll do a quick kind of overview on some of the organic site preparation methods that we recommend and that many of our past grantees have used and found success with. On the first, obviously, if you're taking out turf, one of the fastest ways to do it is to remove it completely with some different tools. So what you see this Conservation Corps member using in this picture here is a sod kicker, a really fun tool to use. Wouldn't recommend doing your entire yard with the manual one. So if that's going to be a problem for you, you can be reimbursed for tool rental as well of a manual sod kicker or a mechanized one that makes things a little bit easier. But you want to make sure to remove really all of that kind of material from that top layer, because that grass can tend to grow back. And if you have a lawn that has a lot of weeds within it as well, that can all start to overtake your planting if you just throw flowers into the mix of it. So be really mindful of that as you're going through your site preparation. The next thing then that you're getting down into is the soil. A lot of our urban yards have really, really compacted soil underneath that turf. And so it can be really important to help give these native plants the best chance as they're very young to kind of branch out, root out, and succeed. You want to loosen that soil a little bit, knowing also that when you do that, you are turning over the soil and exposing probably more weed seeds. And so you want to be really mindful of that as you're going through this process, to try and disturb the soil as little as possible to help prevent that weed pressure, but also to help maintain the structure of the soil. And so one of the really important things that you can do to help with both of those things, and we recommend this for all new projects, is using mulch. We highly, highly recommend that you mulch your new garden. And oftentimes you may just have to mulch it this first year. As you're installing, most of you will likely be installing smaller plugs if you're not doing a tree or shrub garden and you're not seeding. And those plugs are very small compared to what they will soon become. And so making sure that you have mulched the area so that weeds aren't coming up in between things. That'll make one, your maintenance a lot easier, but two, it will give those plants a much better chance of succeeding and growing into their full capacity, at which point they will likely cover that whole garden area, and in future years you won't need to mulch. The other really important thing though with mulching, especially now as we're planting in this late summer, we've been in a drought for the last couple of years, it is a really helpful tool for water retention as well. And so it helps cool that soil, it helps maintain that moisture right at the roots of the plants. So I cannot recommend mulching enough. And we typically recommend using a double shredded hardwood mulch. And the reason we do that is because mulch like chips or like pine bark, things like that, will oftentimes float if we get a large rain event, which you may have noticed we've been getting more and more of. And if you are putting in something like a rain garden, which is designed to take in that water, you certainly don't want your mulch floating away and causing, basically doing the opposite of what a rain garden should do. So you can always ask at garden centers about the different types of mulch that they have available, and they should be able to help you with that. There are a couple of other options that we have for doing this sort of organic site preparation as well. One of them is sheet mulching. This is my personal favorite. You can basically look anywhere in your yard, if it's over turf, if it's on the boulevard, and just cover that area with cardboard and then another layer of mulch on top of that. This is a really great way to essentially like suffocate any of the material living underneath of it. There are a lot of really great resources online for sheet mulching, telling you how to do it and kind of giving you some tips on how thick that cardboard should be and what types of material you can be putting either on top or below the cardboard to help kind of build your soil up as it's going through this process of suffocating the grass underneath. We have a link to it in the Xerxes organic site preparation guide, and that is also posted on our website. It goes into a lot of detail, but you can also learn a lot about sheet mulching if you're Googling things like lasagna method gardening. They'll get into some of the same like preparation for that. Another option that's really great, but maybe not the best for our projects for the fall, is solarizing. You may have seen this. People will cover areas of their turf with generally clear plastic and leave it out during the heat of the summer to essentially roast all of the weeds and turf grass growing underneath of it. It does only work in full sun areas, and it works the best when you can leave it for the whole season, the whole summer season. So as we're planting late into the fall, this might not be the best option, but we want you to know that it is something that we talk about. It is something that you'll see in some of our organic site preparation guides. So if you're coming across it, that is what it is. But like I said, we will be covering tips on how to do this type of site preparation more in depth in our upcoming webinars, and those will be specific to the different types of projects that you're installing. So be on the lookout for those as you're starting to think about what kind of project you want to be working on. And I will say the same thing again, there are so many different types of projects that we see people doing and that we reimburse for. And it's really hard to get into the details of that all in one presentation. So in those upcoming webinars, we will have one specifically on pollinator plantings and pollinator meadows. We'll have another specifically on turf alternatives, and then a final one on resilient shoreline. So we will cover all of these different planting methods and tips that we have for each of them in those webinars. I will say we'll probably cover more of the planting of trees and shrubs and the pollinator plantings because those can often be a really important structural piece to those types of plantings as well. So you can also find some really great resources on our website and just online about planting if this is your maybe first time planting a tree or any sort of native planting. So be on the lookout for that. So after you've gotten everything installed, your garden looks beautiful. The next step to make sure it continues looking beautiful for the rest of its life is maintenance. And for these projects in particular, we are really concerned about plant establishment since you're putting new plants into the ground. One of the most important things that you can do for these plants is make sure they are getting at least an inch of water per week for the first year that they're installed in the ground. These are native plants, are native trees and shrubs as well. The turf alternatives with their longer root structures, they are fantastic in drought conditions. Once they are fully established and those root structures have been given a chance to actually form, but it does take a little while for that to happen. And so to make sure that you are seeing that success in the future, it takes a little bit of upfront work now to make sure that they're going to thrive. So watering at least an inch per week. Typically, we recommend watering fewer times in the week for longer periods, which encourages that water to seep in deeper and those roots to kind of follow it and go deeper into the ground. They naturally like to do that anyway, so trying to assist them in that is a fantastic kind of practice to get involved in. The next thing, of course, is weeds. Weeds are going to be a problem for everyone forever. But the most important tip that we can give to you is to make sure you are on the lookout for them and get them while they are small. Weeds are a lot easier to pull when they are tiny. As you can see these pictures here at the bottom, this is the same species of tree, a Siberian elm, I believe, that they are dealing with here. It's a lot easier to pull that little sprouting one versus having to have someone come out and cut the tree down and dig out and grind the stump, things like that. So moral of the story, get everything while it's small and easy to get. It's also a lot easier to get weeds out after a rain event or after you've watered. So keep that in mind. Rainy days are fantastic because they mean one less day you have to get out and water, but it usually does mean one more great day to get out and weed. Another really great tip for kind of keeping these planting areas clear of the debris and replacing mulch and plants as needed is making sure that you're getting out into your garden regularly to see what they look like, to see so that you know what to expect. You know when something wrong is coming up, you know that this isn't something I put in the ground, it's probably a weed, or you at least have an idea of how well your rain garden is actually getting rid of that water after a rain event. And you know, if a plant didn't succeed here, I know I need to replace something here as well. So we have a really excellent blog post actually that just came out on the Blue Thumb website about summer maintenance. And it has a lot of these kinds of tips from our coaches, as well as some past participants in the grant. So I encourage you to check that out and just keep these kind of new habits in mind as you're planting your garden, knowing that it is now going to be a journey that you and your garden are growing on to maintain and make sure it continues to grow. So we've been mentioning all of these resources. I know that they can be really overwhelming, but they can also be a really, really excellent tool. So I want to go ahead and do kind of a quick breeze through the different resources we have available that you can explore after this presentation. The main 2 points you're going to be going to is either bluethumb.org or the Bowser Lawns to Legumes website. They have a lot of resources listed just for Lawns to Legumes participants on each of those websites. I encourage you to take a look at both of them. What you're seeing here is a screenshot from our resources page on the Blue Thumb website. We have a lot of plant lists, a lot of design templates already selected for you, so that if that is what you're most worried about, how do I design a garden? How do I choose what plants to put in? What's going to work the best in different conditions? Done a lot of that work for you and have a lot of those listings already here. So I encourage you to check this out and explore some of the different options that we've got available for you. Another really, really excellent resource that we have is the Planting for Pollinators Design Guide. And this was created by Bowser specifically for grantees of the Lawns to Legumes program. And what I will say is if you have you only want to look at one resource, this is the one to go to. It is a great booklet to read through. It basically goes through this entire presentation and even more in depth, and is a fantastic guide to continue to refer back to even after this grant. You've finished this grant period. You'll continue learning a lot, and it'll be really useful for your projects. One of the key pieces of information we've gotten back from grantees in the past is that the whole process can be a little bit overwhelming. And so we have worked really hard to try and make kind of a one-stop shop page for you on our website. It's called the Grantee Guide. It goes through step by step what you'll need to do and know to successfully complete one of these projects. It links you to some of our most popular resources. And at any point, if you have a question, I highly recommend starting here and then reaching out to us if it's not answered here, because we've gotten a lot of feedback over the years of doing this grant, and we've tried to put all of that information into this spot just for you to reference as you go through the projects. Another resource that we've put together in partnership with the native nurseries across the state is this list of native plant nurseries and retailers. It is also linked on that Grantee Guide webpage. The fantastic thing about this resource is that these are companies that are nurseries that we have worked with in the past. Most of them are very familiar with the Lawns to Legumes program and have helped many grantees complete projects successfully. And so they have a lot of expertise that they can share specific to installing one of these projects for the first time. We have regular contact with them too, so that they know we have another fall cohort coming out and they're prepared for the number of people that are going to be asking them questions and shopping with them. So highly encourage you to check out this list and see if there's anyone that has the plants that you are looking for or is maybe in your area to just get some more help from. I had mentioned earlier that we will be hosting specific webinars, those 3 specific webinars for L2L grantees in the coming weeks. I also just want to make you aware of the fact that we have our Resilient Yards online learning series posted on our website. It's available for any Minnesota resident to use for free. And it is essentially a kind of go at your own pace walkthrough version of our workshops. And so you can get a lot of really great information there. It's a really great reference or resource to refer back to as well. There are videos from some of our designers, as well as slideshow presentations going in depth on some of these specific topics. So highly recommend that you check that out. And we will be sharing those dates for those other webinars with you in the future. So be on the lookout for that. A resource that we were really excited to put together for grantees this last spring for the first time is an online community forum called the Hive. You, I believe, have already been given access to this when you confirmed for your grant, but definitely recommend going there to check it out. We tried to create this as a space where grantees can connect with each other, ask each other questions, and kind of share the progress on your plantings as you go. We have staff who are in here looking to help answer questions as well as some of our coaches. If you requested a coach, we will try to match you with a coach as best as we can, but the demand for coaches is often higher than we can meet. And so turning to the Hive is another really great alternative resource for you to get some of that like individualized feedback on your projects and your questions. I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Megan now to finish up about your reimbursement.
All right, so hopefully in the next couple of months, you'll finish planting or installing your project. And then the next step after that is to submit your reimbursement request so that you can get that reimbursement and be awarded for the hard work that you put into doing your project. Next slide. So we have a reimbursement request form, and this is what you'll be filling out once you complete your project. It's located on the Blue Thumb website under the Lawns to Legumes tab. The form itself will not be open until August 15, but once it's open, you'll have from August 15 all the way until the November 30th deadline to fill out that form. Next slide. So as we've been emphasizing throughout this webinar, native plants are really the key to helping out our pollinators. So we want that to be the focus of your project expenses. Native plants, trees, shrubs, or Belon seed mixes should be at least 70% of your project costs. You can use your project expenses for other materials such as wood mulch, compost, edging. Those can be up to 30% of what you spend. We also cover delivery fees, so this can be really handy if you're buying your plants or seeds from a retailer and having them ship those plants to your front door. Maybe you live in an area where you're not in close distance to a native plant nursery, so you can go with that method and get the delivery fees reimbursed. We can also reimburse contractor installation if you're hiring labor to help install your project, and equipment rental. So we talked earlier when we were talking about site prep about using a sod kicker, for example, to remove some of that turf. That's a really common piece of equipment that folks will rent out for a few hours to take care of that. And then we also allow some expenses for renters only. So we really want to make this program as accessible as possible for all people. So if you don't necessarily have a yard you can dig right into because you are part of an apartment or you rent your house, we can reimburse for planters or raised bed materials for up to $100. And another quick but important note is that we can only reimburse purchased items that have been purchased after when you confirmed your grant. So after you got that notification email on July 19. Next slide. One thing I didn't mention back on the last slide is that we do have an eligible expenses guide that goes over all of what I just mentioned in detail. So that will be a really important thing for you to refer back to, and we'll be sharing the link for that. It's on the grantee guide as well. So there's a few key items that we'll be asking for in the reimbursement form. One of those items is the receipts for the plants and materials that you purchased. So ideally, we'd like to see an itemized receipt. So it shows the name of the items and plants that you purchased. It should be able to tell us what the nursery retailer name is, as well as the total, and be clear and legible so that we can be able to reimburse you for the correct things. If your receipt includes purchases that were not intended for your project, you can circle or highlight the one item or a few items that you're requesting reimbursement for, and that just helps us speed things up a lot more. Next slide. I said that we prefer itemized receipts. However, depending on where you go, your receipt might not be itemized. It might just say a total, or the items might not say the species name, which is that key piece of information you need. So if that's the case, what we would ask you to do is also submit a list of the plant and item names purchased, or you could also submit a photo of your plant tags. We just want to be able to see the names of the plants so that we can confirm that they are Minnesota native species. Next slide. Another part of the reimbursement process is that we ask you to provide a 25% match to whatever amount of funding you're requesting reimbursement for. So for example, if you're requesting the full $350 of reimbursement, you must provide at least $87.50 in match. So that match can come in two main forms. It can come through just more plants or materials that you purchased, or it can come in the form of time spent on your project. And we value that time at $25 an hour. So for example, if you spend some time prepping your site, if you spend some time planting, then you'll be able to count that as your match. You can also mix these two options together. So with the time match, for example, if you request the full $350 in reimbursement, you'd have to spend at least 3.5 hours on your project to meet that equivalency of $87.57 in the match. Next slide. So zooming out a bit, let's just talk about the timeline from the date you confirmed your grant all the way up until when you'll be completing your project and submitting your reimbursement form. So a couple weeks ago, you were awarded your grant, you confirmed your award, and right now you're attending our first kickoff webinar. And as Alexandra mentioned earlier in this webinar, we'll be hosting 3 more sessions in August that are specifically focused on our different project types. So these are not required. We just offer them to give some more detailed guidance about the steps involved in each of these projects. If you'd like, you can learn about it just through our online resources. There's everything you need there. But if you really want to kind of like hear us explaining and be able to ask some questions live, these are a great opportunity to do so, and we'll have some great guest presenters for them. So our pollinator planting session, which is focused on pocket gardens, pollinator meadows, and trees and shrubs, will be in a couple weeks here on Tuesday, August 15th from 6 to 7. We're still finalizing the date for our pollinator lawns workshop, but we'll send that information out when we have that finalized. And then we'll be doing a Q&A session for shoreline plantings on August 29th from 6 to 7. And we'll be sharing those Zoom links, the registration information to you via email for that. So just be on the lookout for that information. We will be beginning to match you with coaches this week. Your coaches will be reaching out to you mid to late August. You can expect an email or phone call from them if you did request one when you filled out your confirmation form. One thing that we recommend is to start thinking about where you're going to purchase your plants now. The sooner you purchase your plants or seeds, the more options and the wider selection that you'll have from those native nurseries. So again, you can refer to our native nurseries list for some of the places that we recommend. And then when we get into August and September, that's even like early to mid-October, that's going to be your planting season. We've got a lot of resources in the Blue Thumb website for how to do that if you're a first-time gardener and wanting a little extra guidance. And then again, the last day to submit your reimbursement form is November 30th. After you submit your reimbursement form, we'll approve that request. We'll send you a check, and then you'll also receive a Lawns to Legumes yard sign in the next month or 2. All right, so I think that concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar. And we have about 10 minutes here just to answer any remaining questions that you all have. So I think John is going to bring up some questions that were in the chat. And if you have any further questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll address as many as we can in the time here.
All right. We got a lot of great questions in the chat. I copied about 15 that I want to pose here. So I'm looking for quick, quippy answers. First, are the webinars about the pocket planting and the turf, and are those also going to be recorded and shared with people?
Yes, I believe they will.
Okay, awesome. Next, we got a lot of questions about reimbursable expenses. So I'm going to throw out something, and I just want, ideally, yes or no, is it reimbursable? Is a soil test reimbursable? Is it an eligible expense?
So currently soil testing is not reimbursable. However, there's some good low cost options, especially through University of Minnesota Extension. I don't know if anybody else, if Dan, you had something to share about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good option through university soil testing lab. It's pretty inexpensive overall, but yeah, currently it is not a eligible expense.
All right, how about pavers?
Pavers only if it was being used as an edging. We don't specify what the edging might be. So it could be pavers, but not a patio, not, like a larger paved area. And any of the expenses beyond plant materials can only be 30% of the total.
Okay, how about stump grinding?
No, not currently an eligible expense.
And then stones and decor, bee and butterfly houses, garden art, that kind of stuff.
No, not currently an eligible expense.
Okay, thank you. Yes, these are all things you can put in your garden. It's just we can't reimburse you for it. This grant is focused on getting pollinator habitat created. And so, we encourage you to, make a garden you love, but we can't reimburse you for everything you might want in that. Now there's a few questions about timing here. One was a comment I'll just throw out. Someone was going to wait until later in this fall because of the drought conditions we're experiencing. Do you have any kind of tips or tricks or recommendations for when a planting would be good here in the upcoming months?
Yeah, I can try to briefly cover that. When it's seed, so some of you may be seeding, if we have some pretty good moisture towards the end of August going into September, sometimes we seed native plants then. That is a good time for seeding a pollinator lawn. So that is a preferred timing for pollinator lawns. In some cases with native seed, we will wait until late October, early November. We call that a dormant seeding because we don't actually want anything to germinate at that time. We don't want it to germinate before winter. So we do that with native seed as well. And I saw some posts about snow seeding. So that's a similar approach, just trying to seed later in the fall. A lot of the native plant seeds need a winter to break their seed dormancy, and then they'll germinate in the spring. For containerized plants, it's really a matter of making sure they have enough moisture. So you can plant them in the fall, it works well. You just don't want them going into winter being dry in the ground. It's not good for them. So you need to make sure you're watering them still going into the fall as the ground starts to freeze up, make sure they have enough moisture. Fall is a great time for trees and shrubs. It may be the best time for planting native trees and shrubs, but can also work for herbaceous plants as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else you'd recommend for winterizing a newly planted garden so that, the success rate and survival rate is as high as possible coming into the spring?
Well, the watering is important. I think it does help to have wood chips around plants just to insulate them a bit more. It'll keep the ground from heaving if the ground, starts freezing with the moisture. If you have a lot of rabbits or deer, that maybe we're having some type of fencing or some type of protection around them might be helpful.
Okay, great, thank you. How about, let's see, before and after pictures? Megan, can you talk about those for a minute?
Yeah, and I apologize. It looks like somehow we skipped our slide on that. So Alexander, I don't know if you can go back to that slide, but in addition to receipts, the other main item that we ask you to share with us to show us that you completed with your project is a pair of before and after photos. So all we need is 2 to 4 simple shots from far enough away so we can see the whole area. For the before photos, it's okay if you did already start some site prep. We just want to see where you started at the beginning of this grant period to where you finished. If you can, try to take a photo from a similar angle. And of course, after snow melts doesn't apply for our fall group. And then with the after photos, many of your plants will be small. If you did a seeding project, there won't be much of a visual difference. That's okay. Your project might not necessarily be beautiful in the beginning, but it will mature in time. But we just need to see that the components of the projects that you're asking to be reimbursed for have been put in place.
Great. What about if I already have, Grace wants to know, if they've already got, you know, some native plants around the yard, say early bloomers in a garden already, do they have to include early bloomers in this garden too, or is there some leeway in what kind of garden they build to, you know, complement what else is going on in their yard?
Yeah, that's a good question. We just want, spring blooming plants in the area. Potentially you could separate some of those and move them into the new planting too, could be an option. So there could be a little flexibility there based on what you have happening within your yard already. And if you do have a lot of spring blooming plants, maybe you need to focus more on the summer and fall blooming plants.
Okay, what about if we have a big project? What about chemical ways to retreat the area, Roundup, or are we limited to organic methods of preparing a site?
Yeah, we don't have any rules prohibiting the use of chemicals if you're saying, or if you're potentially planting an acre or a large area. That's a decision for the landowner. With a situation like that, we definitely promote organic methods through this program, but the landowner can make that decision.
Okay, thank you. I want to apologize for everyone who has a question we didn't get to. We are just about out of time. So the last question will be, where do we go if we have questions next? Or who do we call?
So first I would direct you to our grantee guide. We have an FAQ section at the bottom of that page where a lot of our common questions are. If you don't get your question answered that way, then we would ask you to reach out to the L2L helpline email if you have a program related question. So about, whether a purchase is eligible, about the reimbursement project. And then if you have a question related to your specific project, if it's about your site, if you're wondering what plant is best for a given condition, I would recommend that you first post that in the Hive, because that is where you'll get coaches and other grantees, in addition to us program staff, all crowdsourcing an answer. So go there first. And then if you don't feel like you have a satisfactory answer, you can email the L2L helpline for that as well. And of course, your coach, if you were matched with a coach, they're a great resource.
I just want to thank everybody for participating in the program. You're all playing an important role for pollinators, so we appreciate your work. We recognize there's a lot of new gardeners as well, so just ask questions as you need to. There's assistance available. You can always start small if you need to and expand your plantings over time.